For weeks now, natural gas has been leaking out of a busted pipeline in the Cook Inlet up in Alaska, and thanks to the weather, we have no idea when the leak will actually be fixed. And this is a story that is not getting much attention nationwide, but I think these sorts of leaks deserve far more attention than they're currently getting, so we're going to break it down. The gas is bubbling from an 8-inch pipeline in 80 feet of water about 4 miles offshore. The pipeline belongs to Hilcorp Alaska LLC, and it moves processed natural gas from shore to 4 drilling platforms in the inlet. Now, what about the volume? It's estimated the fuel line is leaking at a rate of 210,000 to 310,000 cubic feet of natural gas per day, which seems like a lot to be just every day pumping into the ocean. But there are some bigger numbers at play that we're going to get into a little bit and might explain why that leak is still going on. Now, a letter was released. It was as a result of an investigation came out. This is from Hilcorp that said, we all agreed that we would prefer to be able to either immediately repair the pipeline or, if unable to make repairs, to shut in the pipeline if there were no adverse impacts of taking that action. Neither is possible at this time. So they're saying we can't fix it. We also can't shut it down. So let's break down what their argument is, why it is that neither of those things would work. Hilcorp added that broken ice exacerbated by high tidal flows and limited daylight makes it too dangerous to send divers to fix the leak at this time. They hired a corporation to do the diving. They said that the loose ice flowing in the inlet makes it too dangerous, which could theoretically be true. It does seem like a dangerous thing to do. And the head of the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation Group says, the bottom line is the pipeline will be repaired when it's safe to repair the pipeline. When that is, nobody knows.
It's insane.
Nobody knows. But you don't have to worry because they believe the risk to public health and safety is small. Environmental risk is less easy to quantify since a monitoring and assessment program is not yet in place.
Okay.
Why would it be? You've only got pipelines transporting natural gas. You've been doing it for decades. Why would there already be a system to assess it?
But that's the biggest issue when it comes to every single one of these stories having to do with leaks, right? There's no proper oversight. There's a lack of regulation. People like us don't want regulation because we're just looking to be difficult, right? Mm-hmm. We're not anti-business. We're just anti-destroying the environment or taking advantage of consumers. And in this case, this is obviously anti-environment. If you don't have policies put in place or regulations put in place to A, ensure that leaks like this don't happen often or don't happen at all, and B, have some sort of strategy put in place to deal with the leak immediately after it takes place, then this kind of stuff is just going to continue happening. And it is. Yeah. It continues happening. It happens way more often than what we see in the news, which you'll get to at some point.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, the U.S. Coast Guard warned mariners to stay at least 1,000 feet from the bubbling gas to limit the potential harm to them. But it's not just humans in this area that are potentially at risk. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration spokesperson said our greatest concern is for endangered Cook Inlet beluga whales and impacts to their critical habitat. The natural gas discharge is within the winter foraging area for the white whales. So we're talking about an endangered species right there that could theoretically be endangered by this ongoing leak. Now, Hilcorp wrote in its letter to the state that the whales are likely to steer clear of the gas bubble stream coming from the leak. And they added, belugas tend to avoid ice-covered areas. Which sounds good, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be true. The NOAA said the opposite in a February 24th letter saying Cook Inlet belugas have shown a preference for ice cover. And so those endangered whales could theoretically be harmed or die as a result of this leak. Now, we said why they can't fix it theoretically, but it seems interesting that they can't shut it off. And I looked into why it is, and they say they can't simply deactivate the pipeline because they have to keep a certain amount of pressure in it. Because if they don't keep a certain amount of pressure in it, then water can get into the pipeline. And because a long time ago the pipeline transported oil rather than natural gas, the water would get in and then some of the oil would be released. Which is, we don't want that. We certainly don't want an oil leak. But you're talking about an ongoing multi-100,000 square feet per day natural gas leak. So is that really the reason? And I looked into it. It's leaking, as we said, between 200 and 300 feet of the gas per day. But I looked into the amount they generate, and it's far, far, far more. So as a percentage, it's actually not leaking that much. And so they can say all they want about how it's not safe to shut it down because some oil might shut down. I think it's clear that they have a profit motive not to shut it down because they're making a ton of money every single day that this continues. And they're allowed to do that because nobody's really talking about it yet.
Not only do they have a profit motive, they don't want to spend the minuscule amount of money necessary to have safeguards set in place to prevent this type of leak from happening, or a way of dealing with the leak as soon as it happens, right? All it really has to do with, in terms of like regulation and why these types of corporations and companies are against it, is the money that it requires, right?
Yeah.
They just don't want to spend the money. These are energy companies. These are oil and gas companies that we're talking about. These are companies that make a ton of money, and they can't spend the tiny, tiny fraction necessary to just take care of situations like this or prevent situations like this.
Yeah.
And that's the frustrating part about it.
Yeah, and look, theoretically, they could spend the money to fix them a little bit faster, but in terms of preventing it, I mean, look, we have a study, we're not going to get to it today, but we've shown you before leaks in North and South Dakota and other states like that. This is not a rare thing. These systems don't break down sometimes. They break down inevitably, like clockwork. You cannot avoid these pipelines. They're complex systems under incredibly high pressure, transporting liquid and gas, in some cases deep underwater or deep underground. The idea that we can contain them and avoid the environmental catastrophes that can result from it, that's just human hubris. Okay, this sort of energy system, being the core of how we fund our lifestyle, will always result in accidents like this. And maybe, in this case, we'll get off lucky, and only some beluga whales will die, and only some fish will die, because the Inlet Watch organization, which is filing lawsuits over this, says that a dead zone is starting to accumulate in that area where marine life can't exist, and will only spread since we have no idea when we can shut it down. Maybe that's the lucky case here. But we've seen in other cases far larger devastation to the Gulf, up in Alaska. Again, we might see it at some point with the Dakota Access Pipeline. This stuff is inevitable, and we have to challenge not any particular pipeline. We have to challenge the entire philosophy of generating our energy in this way. It has to be far larger than our current efforts, unfortunately.
Let's put some watchers on the wall, investigative journalists to run down the Trump administration and the establishment. You can make that happen. tytnetwork.com/go.